Hi, everyone. Marissa here, and I am here with one of our alumni of our program, Adriana Magana, and we are going to talk about early intervention today and Adriana's role working with families, working in homes, and sort of what that looks like and what journey or path has led her to this point in time. So thank you and welcome, Adriana.
Thank you, Marissa. So
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
yes, of course. So I am Adriana Magana. I work in early intervention supporting families birth to 3 in the Central Valley of California. So that's around the Stanislaus County area. Like Marissa mentioned, I'm an alum from SF State. So after graduating from SF State with a master's, I decided to move back home. So Central Valley is home for me, and started working pretty soon after in early intervention. So that's been about, let's see, that was 2019. So or 2018, at this point, it's about almost 4 years that I've been working within this area. And so for the most part, I support families that have either children that are born prematurely and or I also support Spanish speaking families. So a lot of times my home visits do end up being in Spanish. And so that's definitely been an interesting kind of transition from like receiving a lot of the information and knowledge that I received while at state, receiving that in English, and then having to actively think about how I can present a lot of those resources and strategies to families in Spanish. So that's been interesting and a learning process within these last 4 years, but I enjoy it. I've always wanted to support families that are Spanish speaking, just because of my own experience growing up and knowing that many families who are monolingual Spanish speakers tend to not have as much access to supports in their home language. So that's kind of like what I do on the day-to-day is just support families in home, primarily in Spanish. And then primarily I work with premature babies, usually for the full 3 years. So I start working with them maybe like at 2 months, and then go up until their 3rd birthday. But there's always like a few children who don't necessarily need the support for the entire time. And so I might only work with them for 2 years, but I think it allows the opportunity to really create really important partnerships that do last quite some time. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks for giving us a good background. I feel like Adriana and I talked a little bit about before we started recording of what we would talk about. And now I'm like, oh man, we can go in like so many different directions. So thanks for giving us a good background and sort of what you do and sort of why you are doing it. So can you talk a little bit about the process when you get like the preemie, like 2-3 months, what that looks like? Has the IFSP already been developed? Are you developing that with the family in terms of any kind of evaluation or assessment? Sort of, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So when I receive a new case, the IFSP, the initial IFSP has already been created, so that there is an intake team that completes the initial IFSP with the family. So that specific team does all the evaluations. They do the family questionnaire. They go through the entire IFSP with the family, have that IFSP meeting. And then after that meeting is completed, then the family signs for services and they send it over to the company that I work with. So we work with Valley Mountain Regional Center, so the regional center in this area. And the company that I work with, which is Baby Moves, we are a vendor to VMRC. So VMRC does the whole intake process, and then we receive that case. That case is given to me. I receive all the evaluations, whether that's usually when they're premature, they have a physical therapist, and then an infant developmental specialist that is part of the intake team that just does like the overall evaluation. And so once I receive it, I go through it, I review all the evaluations so that I'm ready to understand the goals and outcomes that and the priorities that the family is interested in. And for the most part, for premature babies, a lot of it has to do with like gross motor skills, since that's the kind of the initial thought of a lot of families. And it is what I focus on for the majority of the time. I would say from like 2 months to about like 9 or 10 months. It's very heavily focused on gross motor skills. So just making sure that we can focus on tummy time, that we can focus on ensuring that the child has the core strength, trunk control to then be able to sit, to then be able to get on all fours and crawl. And then as they start moving closer to being able to walk, then we start really shifting our gears into focusing more on communication and like social skills. So there's, I will say, like the birth to like 1 age, it's very heavily focused. I tend to focus more on the gross motor skills and supporting families through that, because again, that tends to be what families want to focus on. And so having that IFSP already completed, I'm able to really focus on the specific areas of the IFSP where there's a specific question that asks families, like, what are your concerns? What would you like the intervention team to focus on? I usually focus on reading that, and then reading just the developmental levels to see just like where the child falls based on their chronological age as well as their adjusted age, especially when they're premature. So I go in with a lot of information already.
Great. So yeah, that sounds really helpful. So then, like, how does that look? Like, you're going into homes, you're working with the families. Each case, of course, is different, like how often you're going in. But then when you're trying to translate or like interpret this information, how or like what does that look like when you're in these homes?
So although I have all this information before even meeting the family and meeting the child, I spend I would say the first 2 sessions just rapport with the family. So I let them know that I've read the report so that they don't have to repeat everything that they've already told a whole other team. But I just focus more on letting the family kind of talk about their child a little bit. Is there any information that family feels is important for me to know, even just with the handling of their child? Like, do we have to worry about like a child broke a clavicle? Like, do I need to be worried about how I'm handling a specific side of their body? Is there anything that the family wants to prioritize that might not have been talked about during the meeting? And again, just allowing the family to share a little bit more of what they're hoping to get out of these this time together. So that again, I think it allows me to have a focus going in and ensuring that I can come back to that conversation as time goes on. So for example, I actually just started with a new premature baby, I want to say last week. And so these past 2 weeks, it's just been more of those conversations with mom of like, this is what your child is doing, and also pointing out what their child is doing and what the next step is going to be. And so I remember that my mentor teacher for early intervention, as I was in the program, one of the things that she mentioned that is a strategy that I use now more so than ever, is when I have that first meeting with the family, going with one strategy that I'm going to leave the family with for that first week. And the reason for that is that sometimes a lot of families might be a little hesitant about services. Many of them, it's like their first time having early start services in their home. For families, especially Spanish or I may work with Mexican immigrant families. It's very challenging to have another person coming in to support their child and feeling like this outsider is going to be observing and analyzing and critiquing every move that I make. And so trying the strategy that I use is going in, acknowledging what the parent is already doing, having the parent show me what they're doing to support their child already, and then providing just like one little tweak to what they're doing that would make a big difference for their child that week. So again, thinking of premature babies, the biggest thing is no baby likes tummy time. And that's usually the big thing that I hear from parents. And it's like, I try to do tummy time and my baby just cries and cries and cries. So I just pick them up. Some of these babies are like on oxygen. Other babies like have a G tube. So parents are concerned about the G tube. And so simply telling the parent, like, you show me how you do tummy time with them, and they'll show me. And then usually the child is like, their hands are super far out and they're just like, their faces on the couch, on the pillow, whatever it might be. And so simply letting them know, like, oh, one thing that you can do is just tuck those shoulders and those elbows in, and let me show you how you can do that. And then you can give it a try. And you can let me know if that's something that feels comfortable for you. And usually at that point, like, they can see how even just doing something as simple as tucking those elbows in really helps the child be able to lift up their head and not cry as fast or as they usually. So leaving the family with just like one thing, one strategy to do, and also leaving time for the parents to try it out before I leave, and asking them, do you feel comfortable with this? Is this something that works for you? Does it feel uncomfortable for you to be able to do it? Because if the parents don't feel comfortable and confident in doing something, the possibility of them doing it throughout the week when I'm not there is a lot less than if they do feel confident in what they're doing. So.
Great. That's really helpful. I think having that one strategy, and I like what you said, like just basically being able to ask them sort of what they're doing in the home and like kind of take all that in as an observation and then provide just minor tweaks, I guess, to what they're already doing. So I think that kind of builds their confidence too, that like what they're doing is right and they're like on the right track. We can just kind of adjust it like a little bit.
Definitely. And so, and as we keep working together, of course, there's like constant conversations of like, how often have you tried this? And if you've only tried it once a day for like 5 minutes, okay, can we try it twice a day? So working from where the parent, I think one thing that in SPED we really talk about is like meeting families where they're at. And so I think that is like super, super important because we don't want to bombard them with 3 different exercises when they feel like they still haven't mastered the one that we've started with. So
yeah, great. So then, since you're working with families who are like new, maybe not new to parenting, but new to perhaps like a preemie, they're like absorbing all this information. They probably are going to like lots of appointments and things. How are you, or are you like coordinating with other professionals who are also servicing the family? Are you connecting them to community resources? Is someone else on the team perhaps doing that? And I just imagine perhaps, with more of a higher likelihood of immigrant population, like you mentioned, trying to navigate all that, right, is like probably really confusing and overwhelming for families.
Definitely. I think that there's like 2 different groups, I guess we can talk about. So the group of a new family, let's say like a US born family, who language is not a barrier, who has access to a lot of these supports already and can access them by, if I was to give them a resource, they feel comfortable enough and confident enough to give a call to the resource, right? So for those families, what I tend to do a lot more is I start off by just supporting the family on my own. And then usually, because the premature babies, we are just really, the purpose of me as an infant developmental specialist or early interventionist is to monitor their development. So many times, some of these kids, like I mentioned, they do well and they just don't even need additional support, right? So at the 6-month review, we might be keeping it to once a week, but the following 6-month review, we notice that the child continues to meet their milestones and no longer needs my support every week. So we kind of move and start like pulling back. And so for the families that have children that have a little bit more of medical challenges happening because of prematurity, I tend to try to collaborate with pretty much my coworkers and professionals that are within the same company. So the focus is that VMRC, so the regional center, tries to provide a case to a company that has all of the services that the child needs, because the people within the same company or the same vendor are more likely to collaborate because we already have access to each other. Versus I have other children where I'm their IDS or infant developmental specialist, and then another company is providing speech therapy, another company's providing occupational therapy. It's a lot harder to be able to collaborate because there's just different programming that happens with different companies.
Totally, yeah.
And then with regional center provides a service coordinator for each family. So each family has a service coordinator who they can contact if they require any additional resources within the community. But a lot of times, I will say that a lot of the service coordinators have too many cases in their plate to be able to really check in with each family. So I tend to also be kind of like a mediator between the family and the service coordinator if the family hasn't been able to get in contact with the service coordinator. So if a family needs resources for Section 8 housing, like I personally don't have like a list of resources myself, but I would then just send a quick email to the service coordinator like, hey, just want to flag this family. They're interested in X, Y, and Z resources. Can you please just reach out to them? And so providing that support. So doing a little bit of like social work in terms of like that referral process, and then the service coordinator being able to provide that support. For my immigrant families and Spanish speaking families, I tend to be more of a social worker in the way that for the most part, at least with my company, a lot of the providers are not native Spanish speakers. And so I was actually having this conversation with someone yesterday in terms of just the difference between being bilingual and bicultural. And so for a lot of families, especially my immigrant families, it's important not only to be able to speak the same language, but to have a connection in regard to the culture. And so because a lot of families feel more comfortable with me knowing that I am from an immigrant household background, I'm also Mexican, they feel more comfortable having those conversations with me of saying like, you know what, like it's really hard for me to be able to schedule with the physical therapist who can sort of speak Spanish, but sometimes I don't understand what they're saying. So many times I tend to coordinate my services with other providers so that I can be there to be more of like a translator, be more of a mediator between the service provider or the specialist, which would be like a physical therapist, and the family who's trying to also provide information to the physical therapist in this example. And so I think that my role as infant developmental specialist changes based on just the needs of the family. And so sometimes I might just be going like, my focus is just supporting the development. Other times it's providing resources and being more of a mediator between the service coordinator and the family. And then the other area is also just being more of like the home base for the family in order to be able to access the specialist. And so of course, if I'm working on gross motor skills, a physical therapist is going to have more information to provide the family than I would, right? Because my background is not like, I'm not a doctor in physical therapy.
Yeah, you're not a PT.
Yeah, so that's kind of like how it varies depending on the needs of the family.
It's really like a chameleon. You're putting on like all these different like clothing and skills, right? And kind of, it sounds like you're like identifying flaws, so to speak, in the system in some ways, and being able to really just like meet the family's needs based off of what they're sharing with you. And, you know, being and living in the similar community or the same county area, right, that you're able to sort of identify. And it sounds like that has been helping sort of build the rapport in addition to sort of what else you're doing in order to ask families questions and be able to build that trust and relationship with them.
Definitely. And I think that that's like such a key element of early intervention is being able to create these really strong relationships with the families, where it, like, that's the basis of the work that I can do, right? Like if a family doesn't trust me, if they don't feel comfortable with me coming to their home, like it's a very vulnerable state for a family to be in, of having someone come into their home every week for an hour, and whether it's like just using more of like a coaching model, but at the same time, even if we're just kind of coaching the parents, like we're still letting them know or telling them, instructing them on what they should be doing with their child, right? So being able to build like this reciprocity in respect, and acknowledging just how much the family is bringing in, and how much more they have to, in a sense, like how much more power they have to give up in comparison to what I'm having to bring to the table. And so ensuring that I do take the time to create that relationship and create that foundation in supporting the families in order for them to be available for their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned sort of being in a position of power as you're coming into their houses. And so do you have like honest conversations with families about like that position dynamic and sort of how you're seeing the relationship form as you're supporting the child? Or yeah,
I think that again, it really comes down to that first meeting, that first and second meeting, of trying to emphasize the fact that I might be able to bring some strategies into the family home, but what's really going to make a difference is what the family does with their child. And so reminding them that, yes, I can be here to support you 1 hour a week, but anything that your child does and any milestone that your child meets, it's because of the work that you are doing, not because of the work that I do. And so putting that back to the family and actively and explicitly saying that really helps with shifting that mindset of like, oh, this professional is bringing all their knowledge and just like dumping it here. And like whatever this professional does is what's making a difference. And so also reminding families, like when a milestone is met, of like, wow, you were able to implement the strategies we talked about, and now you see what your child is doing. And so just kind of reflecting that back to the families and reminding them of the fact that they are the expert in their child. Like, I'm asking you more questions because I don't know your child. Like, I don't know what works for your child and what doesn't work for your child. And so you are able to modify what I'm suggesting to meet the needs of your child, something that I wouldn't be able to do just with, again, that 1 hour that I'm here a week.
yeah.
And so I think just being able to, and taking the time to explicitly state that, to remind the parents and also increase their confidence in themselves, because I think that many times, again, because of the position that we're in, right? And we're seen as these professionals who have the answer and have all the knowledge of child development and just what works for children. I feel like a lot of families do end up putting us like on this pedestal of like, you're going to answer and you're going to provide everything that I need in order for my child to succeed, when in reality, it's the work that they're doing that makes a difference.
Yeah, it's like, let's bring the pedestal down. We're going to be on equal level,
Yes.
right? Like we're sitting like, side by side. And I like how you emphasize, we're also asking questions because we don't know your child. It's not just like a formality and something that we're supposed to do because of this like IFSP process or because of, what my role is. But no, I actually don't know your child well enough. I'll get to know your child more over time, but I'm only spending like an hour a week, maybe, or even less. And you're spending, 24 hours a day with your child. So it's really important to be able to establish that off the bat with the first couple of meetings, like you said. Sounds a little intimidating going in to meet some of these new families when you have a caseload, right?
Yeah, no, it's, I'm always nervous, like before I meet a family. And so every time that I'm like waiting in the parking lot or waiting out in my car, I'm just like, okay, you just need to take a breather, like go through, even though I tend to follow the same format for every new meeting, where it's like, let's review kind of like the policies and let me get to know you and let me give you information of like what our services are going to look like, what this is and what this isn't kind of thing. Even though I know that I'm going through the same format every single time, I'm just always nervous because, you know, there are some families that I start working with where the parents are just like asking me question after question, and also in a way like trying to figure out who I am and like what my background is. Like a lot of times I get asked about like my education, just to, I think it's also they're trying to feel safe, and know that the information that I'm going to provide is going to be like research based. Maybe they don't say that, but that's, I think, kind of like the process of what comes behind those questions, or especially with kids who have like more medical challenges. So again, like the G tube, like an oxygen, that are connected to oxygen. Those are like the families also that have additional questions because they've had to be in the NICU for 3-4 months. And so they want to make sure that the support and the people who are supporting or working with their children, with their child, is going to be someone that's going to be caring and is going to actually be knowledgeable, rather than just like, oh, I'm just throwing someone random in to tell you what to do, or this is just kind of to like check that box off that you have an infant developmental specialist coming in. So I think it's always nerve-wracking. Like, I don't think I've ever not felt nervous going in. But I think just also thinking about like what the mindset of a parent is in that situation of just, you know, someone new is coming in and they don't necessarily get to choose who they receive as their infant developmental specialist. So unless it's been a family that I've worked with, like with their older children, then usually they will request to just have me as someone that supports their next child, just because there is that relationship already there.
Yeah, sounds like everyone's kind of nervous going into that first meeting or a couple of meetings as you're figuring out, like you said, like who each other are. So I imagine like I would have like a hype song in the car or something to get myself ready to be able to go into nothing like too intense, but something to like kind of boost my like confidence and energy, but then also like grounding in a way to be able to like, okay, families, like, you know, what are we going to learn about each other today as we like embark on this new relationship?
I guess I had never thought about that. Maybe I should like have this like one song that just gets me in the right mindset of
I used to have a hype song going into my pre-K classroom. So yeah, but I think it probably just depends on your students and like the families that you're working with, of course, right? So if you find a song, let us know.
Yes, I will be on the lookout for a song that is allows like, me to
hide, individualized, right?
Yes, definitely. So
yeah,
I'll have to look.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we're nearing the end, so I kind of just want to open it up. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you want to share with current students or anyone thinking about going into early intervention or taking a class, you know, for infants and toddlers?
I think that one of the biggest takeaways for me, just with what I've learned in these last years, has been being mindful of how I'm showing up to meet a family and how I'm showing up every time that I'm there. And so I know that like being in a preschool setting, usually there's like a set curriculum of like, oh, we're going to follow this kind of lesson plan and things might change and shift, but there's more of a structure. And with early intervention, it's very much like, let's figure out how the child is feeling today. Like we have this goal in mind, but even just having a few activities that you feel comfortable with, like going in, because having those simple activities just kind of like in your toolbox already, like you can always go back to them. So one of the biggest ones that I love to use is just having bubbles with me at all times, so that I know that if a child is not not feeling it that day of doing the activities, like bubbles will always line
Bubbles
up.
are happy.
Yeah. So just making sure that you have something so that you can also feel comfortable and confident when you're going in, because again, although we are in this position of power as we're coming in to see these families, you also don't want to feel like you don't have anything to kind of go towards, or you don't have a direction. And so kind of working towards the goals that the families have, but also doing it in a way that you feel comfortable in what you're doing to support their children in the best way possible.
Mhm.
And so I will say the first year or so, it was just like me reading a lot about different activities that can focus on specific areas of development. And so I tend to have like one activity for each area of development, just so that I know, like, okay, this child we're working on communication versus this child working on gross motor skills, versus like we're just working more on supporting this child in communicating because of behaviors. So like, what am I going to target? And having like one activity that I feel confident in doing, that I know that has worked for many children, so that it's also like I continue to build on what I know and continue to build on my own knowledge too.
That sounds great. I think like not overwhelming yourself and trying to know all the things right off the bat, but being able to focus on like kind of one area and then build off of it. Right. And I think that's like what a lot of people do, you know, if they're in preschools or kindergartens. So I think it just sort of depends on the setting. So
Definitely.
great. Thanks for sharing those tips and tricks for us. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time out of your morning to be here and share your knowledge and experience and tips with our students in our program. So thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye.